Hello everybody, Ryan Kurzak here of Asheville Vedic Astrology. Today we're going to talk about relationships, and we're going to talk about love, divine love. We're going to consider and discuss ways to understand your chart in regards to who the person you might be involved with in relationships, how they will show up in your life, as well as how relationships may influence and affect you, or how you'll be influencing others through relationships. Now, this is a popular topic. This is on probably 90% of the first-time client letters that people write to me when they have questions. They want to know about relationships. And it's understandable because we do live in a world where we interact with other people and we don't like to be alone, and we also like to be validated. So relationships are an important aspect of our lives that can be revealed through Vedic astrology. Now, when we are considering this, we need to look at it from a little bit different viewpoint than you might be used to. You need to look at it from the viewpoint of an astrologer, since we're looking at it through the lens, through the eye of astrology. And astrology itself takes a bigger picture look at a person's karma. And this is important because many of us have the idea that if we find that special someone, or if we just know how to work with our planets to attract that perfect person, that all of our problems will be taken care of. And that's a fallacy. In a way, that's putting the idea that you can get all of your needs met through another person. That's usually what occurs in people's psychology. So what we have to do first is realize that from an astrological standpoint, if we want to look at this from the bigger picture, we need to realize that our life is set up in such a way that we are presented opportunities and people that help us understand ourselves. We start to understand that what our experience is of relationships is a direct reflection of either what we put into relationships or our belief systems about relationships. Now, we are going to get into some specifics about the astrological influences on relationships, such as the position of the 7th house lord in different houses, or the other house lords in the 7th. That's going to be very important. But before we get into that, you need to first stop and realize that if you do not have a person in your life that is fulfilling your idea of relationships, you need to consider, number one, maybe this time in your life isn't meant to focus on relationships. Maybe you have other things that you need to work through and deal with, and relationships would be a distraction. It may be that you yourself are not necessarily prepared to have or understand what it takes to make a relationship work in the long term. And this is very important because a lot of what we've been raised with about how it's supposed to be, that doesn't really work in actuality. So we need to realize these things, and our chart can give us an idea of if that is the case, because it may be that you are in a dasha, or you've got a good transit going through your 7th house of relationships, or 9th house committed relationships, which will show growth and opportunities in that area. If that's so, better to put your attention towards that during this time. It may be that you have more important transits or more important activity going on in your chart by dasha in the 10th house, which can deal with your work, in the 6th house, which can deal with your health, in the 3rd house, which can deal with research, or even exploring one's hobbies, personal interests, strengthening the mind. 9th house, that is marriage, but that can also deal with higher education. So we see that each area of the chart represents what it is that we're meant to be focusing on when it gets activated. Some people are blessed with charts that show easy relationships developing. Other people aren't. But the thing we have to remember is that that doesn't make you any less valuable if you are not in a relationship the way you think it should be. we need to learn to turn our attention back onto ourselves and ask, well, I'm not in a relationship. So what is it that I'm meant to be doing right now? What is it that I'm supposed to be working on right now? And that can reveal itself, and that can be very helpful to develop a meditation practice, a contemplative practice, a prayer practice. That way you can learn to let go of all the distractions that you have, all the things that you think that are so important. That way you can attune to that innate intelligence that is all around you. It's within the stars, it's within the air, it's within your body, that knows exactly what's meant to be happening for you right now. So keep this in mind, that this is a difficult topic for a lot of people because we have so many interesting ideas around how relationships should be. And we need to get a sense of what that is through the birth chart. But we also need to get a sense of, through our birth chart, what is it that we are actually supposed to be focusing on right now, based on the harmony of this cosmos, because the chart is in harmony with everything that's going on around it. We have to remember this. Okay. Now, once you've considered that, and that can take a long time to get through, so I realize we only took about 6 minutes to discuss those ideas, but try to think about them a little bit. Now let's say you want to actually look at your chart or a friend's chart to get an idea of, what can I see in regards to relationships? Well, again, you have to think like an astrologer. And what does an astrologer do when he looks at a chart when it comes to relationships? He first looks at the ascendant to see what is the personality of the individual, because that's going to be revealed by the ascendant, by the planet's influence in the ascendant. If this is a person that looks fairly happy, well put together, pleasant disposition, maybe they've got benefics on the ascendant, then we can say, all right, this person's got a good personality. They'll probably make a good partner in relationships. And we compare that to the ascendant lord as well. But then we look to the 7th house to see what are the influences on the 7th house. What are the influences on the 7th house lord? Where does the 7th house lord go? And what this is going to tell us is what will be the quality of a person's relationships. The baseline quality. Now, if we consider each planet in the 7th house, we can think about the sun. Now, the sun in the 7th can be very difficult for relationships because this can put too much focus on the opposite sex or the partners as you're pursuing them. I've often seen that it gives difficulty in relationships as it gives a very regal, strong-willed, oftentimes domineering partner, because the sun has that capacity to be that way. If the sun's in good dignity and well supported through Lajatatiya Vashtas, maybe it has some mudita delight to it, well then, that can show a very loyal partner, because the sun is about loyal and staying true to one's path, one's course. So the sun can give these sorts of things depending on the influences on the sun and the natural, the dignity of the sun based on where it's placed, what sign it's in. And for those of you who are new to this channel, you may want to go back and review some old videos. There's 52 videos. There's a 52 series session, a free astrology session, which goes over houses, goes over planets. It really helps to give you a baseline understanding of what's going on. You may also want to consider studying astrology in a little more detail. There's plenty of digital downloads on AshevilleVedicAstrology.com. I'll put a link to that in the section down below this video. And this year, 2015, I've developed 2 semesters of training that's going to help you understand how to look at a chart as you were if you were thinking about it like an astrologer. So if you go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com, and if you go to the most latest post, there's an announcement there about this year's courses. There's a spring semester, which is going to be a 28-hour online class, and there's a fall semester, which is also going to be a 28-hour online class. The full syllabus is there, so you can look that up and see if you're interested. And that's one of the best things you can do whenever you're researching something, such as the 7th house for relationships or any area of life that you're interested in, first start with a strong foundation, understanding how to read a chart and how to think like an astrologer in the first place. Okay, so we're starting here with the idea of the 7th house. Other things that we would look at would be the position of the 7th house lord. We would look at what's called the Dara Karaka, which is the planet in lowest degree, excluding Rahu and Ketu. That planet is going to show us the specific qualities of the partner. So depending on who is the Dara Karaka, Saturn, Venus, Sun, Mars, depending on who is Rashi aspecting the Dara Karaka, the position of that Dara Karaka within the Rashi, the birth chart, and the Navamsha, all these things are going to tell us who the partner is. When we're looking at the 7th house and the 7th house lord, that's more so telling us how we are going to be impacted by relationships and how we are going to impact relationships. It will give us insight into who this partner is, because you can't separate how it's going to happen versus who it's happening with. But when we're thinking about the two different kinds of ways of assessing a chart, there's the Parashara system, which uses these house lords as we're looking at here. Jaimini uses this as well. But the Jaimini system specifically uses Karakas, or indicators. And the Dara Karaka, the planet in lowest degree, represents the spouse or the partner. So when we're thinking like an astrologer, we need to think in this way. And this is oftentimes why people make mistakes with charts, because they don't take a moment to sit back and contemplate all these different complexities within the chart and what they're wanting to know about. So anyway, let's move on here. With the moon, if the moon is in the 7th house, typically this is good, particularly if the moon is moving towards full. It's a waxing moon. And this can give good emotional connection within a relationship, a close relationship. However, if the moon is weak or it is waning, so it's moving towards new, this can give some fickleness within the relationship. Or if there are negative avashtas on the moon, this can give fickleness within the relationship. Some people say if the moon is weak and it's in the 7th house, it can also give more than one marriage. Again, we have to look at many things before we can jump to that conclusion, so we don't want to just find one area and focus on that. But why would that be? Well, the moon is fickle. So when the moon is weak, it can give a fickle mind, a fickle emotional nature, which can make us flit from one person to the other, thinking that we're going to find our emotional fulfillment in that other person. And again, what we have to remember is that no person is going to fulfill all of your needs. If we think that way, we're just setting ourselves up for disaster. We need to find or attract or pray or mentally work out in our head, how can we have a relationship with someone where we can support them in their path in a loving, unconditional way. And we can accept that same love and grace from them, knowing that we're not going to get along with everything, we're not going to just love every hobby, we're not going to see eye to eye every time, but that we can support each other and that we can understand each other with distance. So being able to come in, spend time together, support each other, but also to be individuals. When we start to see that happening within a person's chart, or just by making that choice yourself, because we don't want to be bound by the chart. The chart will give us ideas on what our strengths and our weaknesses are. We can start to work these things out. What are some ways to work it out? Well, there's a wonderful book called Mindful Loving. People who have relationship problems, who are looking for their soulmate, I'd really advise that they read that book first, Mindful Loving. There's another book by a fellow named Michael Brown called The Presence Process. I may have mentioned it before. I was recently introduced to it, and I find it to be a really wonderful book, which is more personal development. Once you work through that book and that process, you're usually a little bit better set to have a relationship, a healthy relationship. There's a book I wrote called A Course in Tranquility. I wrote that many years ago, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And I find that to be a little bit more watered down version of the presence process. So if you find the presence process to be a little too intense for you, then you can go to my book, A Course in Tranquility. There's many similarities, which is why I enjoy both of those books. And anyway, the point being is this will help prepare you emotionally and psychologically for a good relationship. Let's move on. So Mars. Mars in the 7th house typically gives strain and tension within relationships. It can give a person a very strong sex drive, but it can also make them have difficulty being satisfied within relationships. Now Mars can get satisfaction early on, which is very intense, but eventually Mars can cause a person to have extramarital affairs, again, because they're hungry for 7th house things, which is intercourse, which is being with someone else. And if you have that position, you know that's an issue for you. But Mars typically in the 7th gives that kind of difficulty. So if you have that, you need to figure out, how do I bring strain or tension into the relationship? If your partner has that, you have to learn to figure out, okay, how can we work with this tension that this person naturally has and naturally brings into relationships, and this natural sense of possible dissatisfaction or hunger around wanting to bond with someone else or multiple people. And before you get all judgmental about all of these planetary positions, realize that these are going to be modified by numerous astrological details. So these are just general things, just to give you an idea. And a lot of this information is coming from the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology Volume 2. Okay, so the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology Volume 2, there's a chapter specifically on relationships in here that you can go in more detail for relationships. Now Mercury. Mercury in the 7th. This is an interesting combination because Mercury does make a person very communicative in the 7th. It can give a very changeable nature. It can give a youthful spouse. And relationships are often based on friendship, hobbies, or shared interests, rather than strong emotional ties. So that can be a good relationship. You can be supportive of each other on a very mercurial level. If you get Mercury and Venus involved together, that's a little more difficult, because when Mercury and Venus gets together, again, that makes a person like to explore relationships, which means they like to figure everything out about a relationship and then move on to the next person. So it makes one very interesting and very fun to be around. But that would probably only be true if you had two people with that combination, because otherwise one of the other is going to get bored because they're not going to, again, feel that their needs are getting fully met, which again is a karma that we hopefully outgrow or overcome as we continue living in the world and just seeing how it is to get along with people. Now Jupiter in the 7th. Jupiter is typically good. Jupiter is a planet of opportunities. Jupiter is a planet of wisdom, of grace, of understanding the bigger picture, of faithfulness. That's when he's well placed. So with Jupiter, this can give a lot of opportunities towards relationships. It can also give a good understanding, a good grasp, a good wisdom around relationships. If Jupiter is retrograde or getting starved by Mercury or starved by Venus, this can be more difficult, because then the person is, again, looking for fulfillment through the relationship, complete fulfillment through the relationship, and then gets sort of fed up. Jupiter is also can be a very sexual planet in that he likes to enjoy himself. So Jupiter, poorly aspected or in a difficult situation, can make a person make some questionable decisions when it comes to relationships. They can make the person think and feel that they are luckier, or they can get luckier than might be good for a healthy relationship. Now Venus. Venus in the 7th is a good planet for relationships. This gives an attractive spouse. This can bring a lot of romance into the relationship. And when Venus is in good dignity, Venus is a planet that helps us make positive long-term choices in relationships. So it is romantic, gives an attractive spouse, it does deal with sensuality, but it shows a person who can really make good choices in regards to relationships, in regards to being devoted to a relationship, having devotion towards a relationship. The opposite is true when Venus is possibly debilitated, or when Venus is getting starved by the sun or the moon. This can make one a little bit too sensual, a little bit too loose in their morals, and This can make a person live for sexual union with others. Again, not always true. There are many things we need to consider, so we don't want to go judge anyone immediately based on this. We want to look at the whole chart, but that is a possibility there, or it can make a person suffer due to other people's perceptions of them in this way. Now Saturn can indicate a person marrying later in life. It can give a age difference, make a partner older. This is when Saturn's in the 7th house. Oftentimes, Saturn can give a very dutiful relationship. So a relationship happens out of a sense of duty, rather than passion or love, which would be more of Mars and Venus related things. Saturn delighted by Venus or Saturn delighted by Mercury can be very good for relationships and give a very long-term relationship based on a dutiful love, a love where the person feels very devoted, that they are really there to support their partner. So this can be a very long-term relationship. Mercury can give long-term friendship to the relationship, which can be very good for companionship. Now Saturn can be bad in that it can make a person feel a sense of difficulty or sorrow if Saturn's in difficult avashtas or is weak due to dignity or low shadbala, or if there's difficulty with Saturn in Navamsha. So Saturn, he can go either way, just like any planet. More negatively, it does make a person feel a little bit unloved and isolated in this particular aspect of their life, which is relationships. Now, some other planets to consider. Rahu, this can disturb the long-term harmony within the relationships, because Rahu gives confusion. Rahu gives insatiable desire. Rahu makes a person think that they can always get something better. So Rahu can give some serious difficulty in that position. Again, we have to look at his Lord, what's the dignity of his Lord, and what planets are influencing the 7th and the 7th house Lord. Ketu gives a lot of ups and downs in relationships. It can give a spiritual partner, so positively can give a strong spiritual partner. Ketu can also give a deceitful partner. The nodes always are based on the dignity of their Lord, and also the impact, the aspects towards those nodal points. So these are some general indications here. So this can be modified quite extensively. Some other planets to consider. A lot of Vedic astrologers don't look at the outer planets, but I found them to be very helpful, as has many of my mentors. Uranus in the 7th house, particularly close to the 7th cusp. So this can show 2 marriages. It can show more likelihood of separation, because it usually makes one unconventional or unusual in their relationships. So we have to remember that. If you can be in an unusual or unconventional relationship, that relationship can go on for a while. But if you're planning on getting involved in a very normal, traditional relationship, you might have a problem with Uranus in the 7th house. Now Neptune in the 7th, we're close to the 7th cusp. Oftentimes this gives a lot of confusion and deceit around relationships, or it makes one prone to fantasy. So a person has a lot of fantasy around relationships. They're looking more for the soulmate idea, which, as I've said before, there aren't soulmates, there are karma mates. There are people that match your karma, because there's only one soul, and we're all a part of it. So there are karma mates, but we get hung up on the idea of soulmates. And that's often true when Neptune is influencing that 7th house. Now Pluto in the 7th. This gives oftentimes a chaotic influence, a disruptive influence to relationships. It gives difficulty with stability and harmony within relationships. Why? Because it shows that if you've got Pluto in your 7th house, it shows that you are working through ego issues around relationships. You have challenges around your ego, around defining yourself through relationships. So you're learning to break that cycle, hopefully. Otherwise, what always happens is relationships blow up, or there's too much controlling going on within the relationships. So overall, the 7th house deals with partnerships. So if you want to know how partnerships are going to function, and marriage and relationships, intimate relationships, are oftentimes the closest of our partnerships, we need to look at the planets impacting that 7th house. We also need to look at planets impacting the 7th house lord, the Dharkaraka, but we will continue on with that vein in another video. So just digest this and think about it for a little while. And remember that what your chart is showing you are your potentialities. What the dashas and the transits show you are when those potentials are going to manifest. If you're not in a relationship and you're wondering why, it may be that there's an aspect of you that you need to come to terms with, understand, work through first. If you're in a relationship that's not working, that same thing is going to be true. Or it may be that your time right now is meant to be focusing on something different. So this is the difficulty of astrology and relationships, is that number one, there's a much bigger picture going on here. And we really validate ourselves through relationships, or we try to validate ourselves through relationships. So if we don't have one, that makes us feel bad. That makes us feel like we don't have any value. But what we have to remember is that we are valuable for the simple fact that we're here. If we can learn to see that for ourselves and for other people, rather than trying to put our expectations on ourselves or others, I think a lot of us would be much happier, and would be more in tune with and aligned with what we consider to be the divine consciousness or innate intelligence all around us, because it's quite amazing what's going on right now. You might not think it's very much, but again, the simple fact that you are here, that we can perceive this, that there are so many people in this world all living their lives on this little rock called Earth, all the complex creatures that are happening, everything that's going on, there has to be, there is, a profound intelligence behind that. And we may not be able to see it with our limited human minds, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Part of astrology, it's part of a yogic path. It's learning to attune to this, to trust this, to see this, to be this. And then astrology becomes what it's meant to be, a guide, not to help us get what we want, but to help us see where to put our attention right now to participate within this harmony. And that's the beautiful thing about astrology. It's one of the reasons I really love astrology, especially when I find clients that are interested in understanding that about themselves and working through these things, getting a grasp of this. That's the most rewarding thing. Otherwise, all we're really doing is trying to, we're like a kid in a candy store. We want that, we want this, we want our parents to give it to us right now, and then we throw a fit when we don't get it. And there might be a very good reason why you're not getting all the candy you want. You get candy when it's time to get candy. So consider this. And we'll do another series of videos. We might do 2 more series of videos on this, especially since February is coming up and Valentine's Day, and everyone loves relationships, to explore relationships then. So we'll do another video on the placement of the 7th house lord, and I may also do another video on the Dharkaraka. But all this information that we're going to be going over is from the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2. So if you look for that book, you'll find it there. And then in the year ahead, if you want to go more detailed into your astrological studies, you can go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com. There's plenty of digital downloads there to help you, classes. And we'd love to have you participate in the live 2015 classes, both the spring and fall semesters. So go check out that syllabus and see if that's something of interest to you. That way you can learn to read these things. You won't be so fixated on one particular aspect of the chart and think that everything is going to work out beautifully or everything is going to be doomed because of one indication that you see. You'll be able to see the chart holistically and think about it like an astrologer, which is excellent. We need more of those kinds of thinkers within the world so we can see the holistic expression of life. So in the meantime, be well. It was enjoyable to talk to you again, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.